On December 8, 2024, the dictatorship of Bashar al-Assad fell when rebel forces took over Syria. The offensive was spearheaded by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and supported mainly by the Turkish-backed Syrian National Army as part of the ongoing Syrian civil war that began in 2011. The reign of the Assad regime under Bashar was one that was marked with international condemnation for arbitrary arrests and detentions, the widespread use of torture, attacks on civilians, and the use of chemical weapons. And while many in Syria and around the world celebrated the fall of the regime, there are looming questions about what happens next for a country that has been plagued with violence and turmoil for most of the past 2 decades. I'm now joined by Ribal al-Assad, the founder of the Organization for Democracy and Freedom in Syria and the cousin of the deposed leader Bashar al-Assad, to discuss the fall of the regime and the future of Syria. Thank you very much for joining us.
Many thanks to you, and it's a pleasure having me.
So, Bashar is your first cousin. Before we talk about what happens next in the future of Syria, can you explain to us what your relationship is with Bashar and what your view is on how he ruled the country?
Yes, well, I've left Syria when I was a child. When I was 9 years old with my family, I went into exile because of differences between my late uncle Hafiz al-Assad, who was Bashar's father, and my father. And I've only been back, like in 1993, after my father returned for his mother's, funerals. And I met at the time Bassel, who was supposed to take over, that his father was preparing to take over, passed away in a car accident in 1994. And shortly after, Bashar, whom nobody knew in Syria, who was studying, for less than a year in London, they came back to Syria, and his father started preparing him to take over. And the only time that I've met him actually was at the Sheraton Hotel in 1994. Where he spoke to me in a very in a very bad way, telling me that, haven't you seen the video of your cousin Yahya al-Assad, who was an officer in the army? And I was very shocked for him telling me that he had people torture his own cousin, and that they had videotaped him. So of course I told him, this is crazy. How could you, are you insane to talk like that about your own cousin, and that you have tortured him and had people film him? And he said, well, I think you will not understand until I do the same thing to you. So of course I came out of the car, and I attacked him, and he ran away. And a couple of months later, I was going to study in Boston, and they tried to assassinate me at the Damascus International Airport. And thank God my father accompanied me to the airport. And when the officers, saw me, they panicked, and they ended up taking me after they were shooting in the air under the Austrian airline for over 2 hours and a half. But I convinced my father to let me go with them, because we were surrounded under the plane. And finally, they took me for 20 minutes, and then they took me back to the house, and I left to study again in Boston.
So you mentioned potential attempt on your life, but I'm
Yes.
curious, what is your view on how Bashar ruled the country for the better
Yes.
part of 2 decades?
Well, this is when I kind of understood, that I was very young at the time, and I understood that this is kind of if that's how they treat, and they're willing to go that far just because of a problem, an argument I had with him. That's and my uncle tried to assassinate me, I'm his own nephew, so could you imagine what they would do to people who just want to talk about the need for democracy, or the need to for they had, when there's an economic crisis and they wanted to have better salaries, or food, or whatever, and it was really horrible, because I was there for 2 hours and a half. I thought me and my whole family were going to die at that time. And I really decided, that this could not, I really need to do something to change, start working to change this fact. And then I went back shortly in 1997, for Christmas holidays, to see again my father. He was dismissed out, he was vice president, and but he had given his resignation, but which was refused by the president at the time. And he left Syria and asked me if I could stay in Syria and take care of our charity. We had around 4,500 families every month, which we were supporting. So they started arresting them, they started torturing them, making them sign white papers, which they could fill in later. and those people would come back to the house and say, we cannot leave anymore because those people are, every time someone, every time someone comes to take, they hit this monthly aid, he would get arrested, tortured. So at one point we had
I don't mean to interrupt you, but we are about to go to commercial, but we will pick right back up
yes.
on this subject when we return.
Sure.
We'll be right back after this quick commercial break. We're back with Ribal al-Assad, the cousin of the former president of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, talking about the future of Syria, the Assad regime. Ribal, you've mentioned several instances here where there were direct threats on your life, the
Yes.
lives of your families, the people whom you love. You're now not located in Syria, you're in London. What was your reaction to the fall of the regime in December?
Well, I was, to be honest, I was expecting it because we've been trying to tell the regime, through my interviews, through speeches that I've made all over the world, almost trying to tell them that they need to move towards a peaceful transitional change to democracy. If not, this is going to happen. We became the poorest country in the world in the last, 13 years. Over 1 million refugees. We have over 8 million internally displaced, over 1 million people who have died. The United Nations, as you know, stopped counting in 2014, and the number was at 400,000 at the time. Over 1 million injured, 60% of the infrastructure has been destroyed. People would have electricity 15 minutes every 5 hours. So life was really becoming impossible. The salaries at between $10 and $20, and the soldiers, at $1 or $2. So it was really unbearable. And you had all those extremist groups who were in Idlib. So as you know, at one point, all those groups were fighting all over Syria. Jihadis from all over the world were coming, from Western China, the Uyghurs, to Chechnya, Dagestan, Uzbekistan, the Caucasus, Europe. But they were not synchronized. And the army, every time that they would surround them, they would put them on green buses with their arms and their families and send them to Idlib. So in Idlib, which is between Latakia province and Aleppo and on the borders with Turkey, they became an organized force backed by Turkey, supported by Turkey. And these are the ones who were getting ready for that day. And we were we were warning people from that time that if he doesn't move quickly and have a government of national unity and allow political parties to exist and allow genuine democratic groups to form and we have a new constitution, new modern progressive constitution where everyone would be equal under the rule of law, regardless of religion, sect, ethnic group, and gender, that it's going to end up this way. And at one point, even his allies dropped him because, as you know, Russia was very close to Erdogan, and they have interest in Turkey's Erdogan, and not they don't want the opposition to take over because Turkey, first of all, is the second largest army in NATO. And they wanted to keep it, kind of on the side. They didn't intervene much in the war in Ukraine. They kind of sided it. The gas was sold through Turkey to other countries. So it was his interest. So before the Turkish election, Putin was begging Bashar, you have to sit with Erdogan. But Bashar was like, but I prefer to sit with the opposition if they win, because the opposition did not send, give safe passage and training and arming to all those jihadis, So I prefer to wait until they come. But Putin was telling him, but the opposition is pro-Western, is not, they won't be with Russia. He did not listen to him.
You mentioned the word jihadis. Is that an appropriate term for HTS and the new leadership in Syria?
It is definitely, the leader of HTS, al-Jolani, Mohammed al-Jolani, which now has changed his name to al-Shara, he was a member of ISIS. And then he went on to form, the al-Nusra group, which is al-Qaeda in Syria. And we have, there are many reports where they are, and videos and others where they've been, for the past 13 years, they've been cutting people's heads off, crucifying people. They kidnap, if you remember, the nuns in in Ma'lula, they killed the Lebanese soldiers in Lebanon. One of them is a brother of a very good friend of mine who was a military, he was a soldier in the Lebanese army. So those people have done many atrocities, and both the regime and these groups are both responsible, as per the UN report, of using chemical weapons against each other. So both of them have destroyed Syria. Both of them are responsible for the killing of over 1 million people and injuring more than 1 million people, and and of getting rid of the genuine Democrats who really went against the regime in 2011, who wanted a genuine representative democracy. Everyone was looking west at that time. Everyone wanted a Western kind of democracy. As you know, all the millions and more refugees who went to Germany and to European countries, nobody went to Iran or Afghanistan or those other countries.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we are going to go to commercial in a second. You mentioned you bring up a really important distinction in terms of the fall of the regime and the end of that brutal dictatorship, and what is next in terms of HTS and what they stand for and what they are culpable of. So we're going to discuss that more when we come back after the commercial. We're back with Ribal al-Assad talking about the future of Syria. Before the break, we were talking about HTS. There are clear links to Islamists, to terrorist organizations, the leader of HTS. Now, he appears to have tempered some of his views, or at least portrayed that way in the media when he's been interviewed, in terms of what the future of Syria can look like. What is your impression on that rebranding that he's attempted in terms of trying to distance himself from his past and his involvement in ISIS and al-Nusra?
Well, first of all, it's very shocking that the international community, has accepted that those groups of, as I said, Islamist extremist terrorists, because they are still listed on the terrorist list. And someone, you cannot have, for example, a serial killer, who has killed 100 people, let's say, and suddenly after 20 years, he comes to court once he gets arrested. He said, you know what, guys, I've changed. So, and they said, oh, we're really sorry, we'll let you free. The same thing. Could you imagine if they would have gone, for example, after what bin Laden did in 11th of September, and Madrid bombing, London bombings, 7/7, all of that. Could you imagine now we go bring him a nice tailor to give him, to have a nice, nice haircut and give him a nice suit. And then we go and recognize him as a democratic leader just because he said, oh, I was young and I changed. I mean, this guy is still young. He cannot. He was not 5 years old when he was doing that. He was a responsible man who went to fight in Iraq, in the ranks of ISIS, and then he moved, to lead Al Qaeda. And when they were entering Damascus, moving from Idlib to Aleppo to Damascus, we saw the videos how they were killing people, cutting their heads off. They were calling the people's families and telling them, taking the phones of soldiers that they've killed and calling their families, telling them, are you the mother, the daughter, the sister, whatever, or the brother of this person? And they would say yes. They said, we just would like to let you know that we've cut these people's head off and we're coming for you. And this is what they're still doing today. We cannot trust those people. If you remember the Taliban, when they came, they said, oh, we changed. We're no longer the Taliban we were before. And as soon as they arrived and they took power, girls are not allowed to go to school. You remember Hamas when they took over. Everyone said they were democratically elected, but everyone forgot to say that they were throwing off all their opponents from, the roofs of the buildings. So we cannot trust Islamic extremists. It's impossible. Now they're doing a lot of killings. They were even filming their own killings and tortures on cameras. That one of their leaders came out in a recording and told them, guys, we thank you for the great efforts of what you're doing now in the coastal region and other regions of Syria, but please stop videotaping them because the world is watching us. Yeah. So now they're doing it in silence. Before we were getting a lot of videos. Now we're getting a bit less because they stopped videotaping their own torture, their own killing, their own kidnapping. And we're hearing of people they're kicking them out of their homes. They're raping women in homes. They killed 3 clerics 2-3 days ago. They are burning religious places belonging to minorities. This is definitely not. Does anyone in the world believe? Are we going to still be naive about letting those crazy people take over Syria? Syria is on the Mediterranean. It cannot be a jihadi land. It's not Afghanistan. those people could take boats, and be in 2 hours in Cyprus, and then or the Greek islands.
And here's a question for you. How do we ensure that it doesn't become a failed state? I mean, when people think of Syria, they think of the failed state that it became from 2011 onward. Is there any path here to avoid repeating that history?
It's impossible. If the international community, I mean, mainly the Western countries, Europe, the US, Canada, and other, doesn't really intervene to get rid of terrorists. This is a country run by terrorists. Before, in 2016, Rob Wainwright, who was the head of Europol, he said there were between 3,000 and 5,000 jihadis, hardcore jihadis, who had fought in Syria back in Europe. And, for each jihadi, you need 16 to 21 person for surveillance. So could you imagine at that time, 5,000, you need an army of people to just follow these people around, So could you imagine if the whole of Syria becomes like a Disneyland for jihadis, where they come from all over the world, and they have access, as I told you, to the Mediterranean, and suddenly you're going to find them everywhere. You remember Erdogan at one point, he was sending, as a blackmailing, he was using the refugee card with Europe. Well, now he's going to be sending also jihadis there, if to get whatever he wants, because he has an expansionist, ideas, and he believes the Ottoman Empire stretches, from North Africa to Western China.
Sure.
So it's very dangerous, and we should not let that happen. We should intervene to protect those people in Syria and to move towards a genuine representative democracy.
And on that democratic note, we do have to go to commercial. I want to touch on what democracy in Syria could look like if and when there are elections. We'll be right back to discuss that after the commercial. Ribal, before the break, you mentioned a Syria that's a true representative democracy. Now, HTS and their leader have said that elections probably won't happen until at least for 4 years. Is that justified in order to allow the country to get its feet back under itself after the fall of Bashar? Or should elections be sooner? And if they are sooner, is there any prospect that what emerges from an open election represents the liberal democratic values that much of the West would hope for the people of Syria?
Well, now that those people have taken over, they're definitely not going to, leave power. Now, for this 3-4 years, they're going to try to assert their power. They're going to kill more people. They're going to torture more people. They're going to, arrest a lot more people. And they started kicking people out of their jobs, members of many minority groups or Ba'athist and others. So we definitely have to, help Syria, rid Syria of all those jihadis before we could move towards a genuine democracy. You cannot have a genuine democracy, a secular democracy, with jihadis. It's impossible, because those people, in their perverted ideology, they believe that everyone else is an infidel. Everyone who doesn't share their perverted ideology is an infidel. Now they have all those foreign, tens of thousands of foreign jihadis. They started giving their commanders posts. Could you imagine in the Syrian army? Now you have commanders who are Uyghurs and Armenian, and Albanian and Jordanian and Egyptians and Uzbek, and it's those people, and Turkey started printing the new IDs and passports. So could you imagine all those people are going to become Syrian citizens? Whoever is going, what country is going to give Syrians visas anymore after those jihadis become Syrians? So first of all, and you cannot have any election before we have a constitution, a progressive, modern constitution, as I said, with equality of all citizens and the rule of law. Those people would never agree to equality of women and men. They would never agree between equality between Muslims and Christians. They would never agree on equality between a Sunni and Alawite, a Shia and Ismaili, a Druze, a Murshidi and Kurds and Arabs and Turkmen and Circassian and Armenians. We have all this beautiful mosaic of people in Syria, but those people want to run the country as an emirate, as they were running it in Idlib. This guy had many jails in Idlib who are like Sednaya jail. People think that they were living under an amazing democracy in Idlib. They were selling Druze women as slaves. Mm-hmm. So the more time we leave them, and the more we're going to have an Islamist rule, an Islamist caliphate. and they view all other Arab countries are terrified of them. You look at Egypt, look at UAE. Nobody wants anymore to have any travels or give visas to Syrians. They are very dangerous. As I said, they have an expansionist agenda, and we have to stop them, because before we find them starting to create chaos in other Arabic countries, starting to move to Western countries, European countries, and soon to the US and Canada and other countries.
We only have about a minute or so left here, but is there a risk that this new regime could fall back under the influence of Iran?
No, I don't think that today the influence of Turkey, because as you know, Turkey and Iran are both fighting. They are both expansionists, but Iran has a limited influence because they use the Shia Arabs, from in Iraq mainly, a bit in the Gulf. Now they have the Houthis in Yemen, who are not even Shias, but they're using these and they're minority, very small minority in Syria and in Lebanon. That's to get access to west to the Mediterranean. But the Ottoman Empire, we all remember, they really view as, their empire extending from Mauritania to Western China. And they have, Turkey has become the Hollywood of the Middle East with, an amazing soft power. All their movies and TV series are dubbed exclusively in Syrian dialect. And on top of it, they have a huge military industry, unlike Iran. They make their own tanks, their own their own weapons, their own drones. So it's a much more dangerous country, and we should not let even Turkey. We should let Turkey know that yes, they are our NATO ally, but they definitely, we're watching you, and we're not going to accept you starting to expand. As as soon as HTS went into Syria, the first thing Erdogan said, we corrected the mistakes that the French and British did, the Sykes-Picot Agreement. And now we took back Aleppo, Homs, and all these areas. So
Ribal,
we can see already what is it that he wants, and that he's using those people just as chess pieces, so he get to what he wants.
Ribal, thank you very much.
With the backing of Qatar. Yes, sir.
I apologize, but we do have to
please,
end the program
no worries.
here. But I appreciate you taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you very much, Dave. Thank you.